Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Adelina. Today I'm gonna be going through all the books that I read this year so far. It's 12 books in total. I know it doesn't sound like much and it's a bit below what I managed to read in the first half of last year, but that's totally fine. I haven't set any goal in this direction this year and I would say it's working perfectly well. I'm not trying to put any pressure on myself whatsoever. I did start a reading journal where I'm trying to be more organized. I'm usually all over the place with my notes. This journal, together with annotating my books, have been really helpful in keeping track of all my thoughts and remembering much more details from each book I read. I think I can say I'm overall quite pleased with these books. I will talk about them in chronological order. I don't really like to rank them, though I do have my favorites and least favorites. I will try to let you know more about my experience with them, rather than going into very specific details on the plot. I talked about most of these books anyway in my other videos this year. I will link them somewhere on the screen and in the description. Okay, without further ado, let's get into it. I started the year with Open Water by Caleb Azumah Nelson, and honestly, I would reread this anytime. It made me feel deeply sad, but not in an overwhelming way, if that makes any sense. I would describe this book as slow dancing in the spotlight with your headphones on, seeing nothing else around you, just following the rhythm. The prose is extremely lyrical and the storytelling is intimate in a way that takes total control of your emotions. Caleb Azumah Nelson wrote with such grace that the pages just flow naturally one after the other. This is one of my favorite quotes. I dance to breathe, but often I dance until I'm breathless and sweaty and I can feel all of me. All those parts of me I can't always feel. I don't feel like I'm allowed to. It's my space. I make a little world for myself and I live. Open water is the unknown world one needs to survive in day by day. Learning to navigate it can be a challenge, especially for marginalized communities. There are a lot of moral questions to be reflected on. It speaks to you directly in the most vulnerable and touching way possible. And these are some of my favorite books. The next book I read was Babel by Rebecca Kuang, and it's only fair to say this is my least favorite book of the year so far. It's been quite a disappointment for me, in part because I had such high expectations due to its hype, my fault, and in part because the premise of the story gave me high hopes of this being a truly great book. But it fell short of that because Rebecca's Kuang writing is, how to put this nicely, extremely condescending, to the point where she just ruined the story for me. I get that she's a respected academic and her research is flawless, but when it comes to writing beyond her scope, it's poorly executed. And no matter how great her ideas or how important the themes she explores are, they do not make up for the lack of nuance and depth to her plot, world building, and characters. Everything seems to be a narrative device she uses so that she can tell us a moralizing story that hopefully will blow our minds. I'm sorry, but that's just not how it works.
That's not how the Force works.
Moving on. Next, I read The Moveable Feast by Ernest Hemingway, and this is definitely one of my top reads this year. It's simply stunning and breathtaking in the way that when a summer rain touches your skin and you smell the scent of the sunscreen mixed with hot wet dust, they bring back to you the sweetest memories. Hemingway laid down his own memories from when he was a young, aspiring writer living in Paris in the 20s. And this book is such a feast, not only because of all the eating and drinking that happens in here. Be prepared to have snacks around you, you'll need them. But also because of all the places he described and all the artists he shared Paris with. His writing is melancholic and nostalgic. There is a raw beauty, an unexplainable comfort when it comes to these emotions. They are not like the momentary feelings that consume themselves as quickly as they come, make us act impulsively. These ones linger with us, stick to our soul, and make us stand still. They make us reflect and look for meaning. Hemingway managed to instill all of that with simple and concise words, but their essence is as heavy as that summer rain that soaks you wet from head to toes. And if you want to get a taste of that, just listen to this. There is never any ending to Paris, and the memory of each person who has lived in it differs from that of any other. We always returned to it no matter who we were or how it was changed or with what difficulties or ease it could be reached. Paris was always worth it, and you received return for whatever you brought to it. But this is how Paris was in the early days when we were very poor and very happy. I continued my reading with Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and there is something about the way she writes I cannot quite put my finger on. I enjoyed everything I read from her so far, and this book was no exception. It got me hooked from beginning to end. She does have her own recipe where she illustrates and captures the vibes of different historical decades like the 50s and the 60s or the 70s and the 80s. Then there are the unreliable narrators, the family secrets and the drama, the celebrity lifestyle. I especially liked the way she described Malibu's social and economic transformation from a quiet rural fishing area to middle-class neighborhoods, until it was eventually taken over by celebrities, rich people's mansions, and their luxurious lives. And that's the thing with Taylor Jenkins Reid. You go into reading her books expecting some flimsy story you've been saving for a cozy weekend, and then you're somehow caught off guard by the emotional power she brings to her narration. She explores the human condition in such a digestible way, but she never takes it lightly. One of my other favorite reads of this year was White Nights by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I went into reading this expecting it to be a simple, sad love story, but I was actually surprised by the depth of thought that goes into these merely 90 tiny pages. That's why I embrace sadness. It's cathartic and it invites you in to reflect. I would have never guessed that this little story here would inspire me to talk about our loneliness epidemic, but it did. It explores loneliness in the most touching and sensitive way. Dostoevsky had a gift to make you feel understood, to find a sense of belonging in his words. Because at those moments it begins to seem that I will never be able to begin living a real life, because it already seems that I have lost all sense, all feeling for the genuine, the real. You hear all around you how the trunk of humanity thunders and spins in the whirlwind of life. You see how people live. They live in reality. You see that life for them is not forbidden, that their life doesn't vanish like a dream, like a vision. And in vain does the dreamer rake through his old dreams as if they were ashes, searching in these ashes for at least some little spark in order to fan it into flames, and with this rekindled fire warm his heart which has grown cold, and resurrect in himself once again everything that he had held dear, that had touched his soul, that had made his blood boil, that had brought tears to his eyes and had so splendidly deceived him. Another book from a Russian author, We by Yevgeny Zamyatin, a dystopia that inspired George Orwell's famous 1984. Unfortunately, not as well known as that, a fact that the historical context had much to do with. To put it simply, it was way too early for such a story to appeal to the larger public, and when the right time came, it was already overshadowed by its successor. I also think that 1984 is more commercially attractive, if that makes sense. We is written in an overwhelming prose, very lyrical and philosophical, with a lot of mathematical and technical metaphors, which I know may sound like a totally abnormal mixture, but it works perfectly well. The protagonist loses himself in details which emphasize his inner struggle and dilemma, the mechanical perfection, the geometrical order, versus the abstract notion of a soul, the unknown X that follows no logical rules and disturbs his equation. Its subtlety is remarkable and extremely challenging. While I was going through my journal, I came across this phrase that I wrote. Reading this book feels like remembering fragments from a dream and trying to put the pieces together so it all makes sense. Moving on to French literature, this year I read Fresh Water for Flowers by Valérie Perrin, and it was the kind of book I knew from the very first pages I would like. I simply fell in love with the writing. It's warm and calm, quiet and introspective, meticulously crafted. It takes you by surprise with every new little detail it brings to the story. The first-person narration felt so intimate, like reading someone's diary in the most respectful manner. It's a rich story full of other smaller stories that each felt like a life lesson told by an old and wise person. The protagonist is a woman who has faced a lot of sorrow in her life, a woman who has been abandoned many times, but ultimately she stands as the pure embodiment of resilience. She's a caretaker at a graveyard in a small town in France, and because of her many struggles, she knows how to behave herself in the face of loss, how to tend delicately to someone when heartbreak takes total control. That graveyard was her refuge, and from her own grief, she built a refuge for others. It's a real lesson of how little it takes to make one happy, to truly be at peace, and that's the best thing this book could have given me. Next, I read Wanting, The Power of Mimetic Desire in Everyday Life by Burgis, a non-fiction book that explores the psychology behind why we want the things we want, how much is truly our own desire versus how much we are influenced by others, and also how to break the habit of doing what everybody else is doing when that doesn't bring us the satisfaction and happiness we pursue. The book relies heavily on the works of philosopher René Girard. It almost feels like a paper written as an attempt to prove his theories. I wouldn't necessarily have an issue with that, but I found Burgis a bit superficial in his approach. He doesn't really explore much beyond some snippets from Girard's ideas. He does have some memorable real-life examples. The Lamborghini versus Ferrari story that made Lamborghini go from building tractors to building cars when he found himself unhappy with his Ferrari car, or the story of a chef who gave up his restaurant's Michelin stars when he felt that kind of status just killed his creativity and passion for cooking. But other than that, it doesn't really stand out as a groundbreaking book. Next, I picked up Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained by John Milton. And it's been an intriguing journey. Milton's genius is indisputable, but he was so biased and blind. And I'm not talking about being physically blind, which he was when he wrote this. Calling it remarkable would be an understatement. He wanted to tell a moralizing story about good and evil, inspired by the tumultuous politics of 17th century England, but he never managed to appeal to me as a reader. I felt his preaching came from a place of superiority, and I perceived him as a proud man who looked down on those whose spirituality was not worthy of his standards. As I said in my other video where I talked in more detail about these works, I think that Paradise Lost is Milton's own search for redemption, but he just fell short of achieving the higher virtues he regarded so greatly. It's a challenging read due to its format and the period it was written in, 4 centuries ago. I think it took me around 3 weeks to finish it, but it's so thought-provoking that I would definitely recommend this if you are looking to expand your reading. The next book was another controversial read, The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. A book that makes you fall in love with its lyrical prose, with its haunting intimacy and its beautiful descriptions that crawl under your skin and make you breathe in all sorts of emotions. The Bell Jar is on its own such powerful imagery that one can feel claustrophobic just by thinking of it. In her only novel, Sylvia Plath explored the many dark and foggy and distorted sides of mental illness, how confusing the world must feel for those that experience it, and how, for someone outside the bell jar, it is hard to truly understand or relate to them. She also addresses issues like society's expectations when it comes to women, but she does that from the perspective of a white feminist. And here is where her writing becomes problematic, because she has some extremely racist and bigoted remarks. Instead of using her more privileged status to promote equality and safety for all, she perpetuates the same oppression and exploitation on other marginalized communities that she herself, as a woman, faces. And I think there is simply no excuse for such behavior, whether we are speaking of mental health issues or a common practice for the time period. I would have expected more from someone who knows too well how it feels to be mistreated and looked down on, especially when the civil rights movement was in its bloom. Okay, after finishing The Bell Jar, I really needed something comforting, so I picked up Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby von Pelt, and it was exactly what I hoped for. A heartwarming story full of charm and humor that felt like the fresh breath of air you take after you dive in the salty sea and come back to the surface at golden hour. It was a story that I hardly put down. The plot is super engaging, the characters are complex and so authentic. They feel like somebody you might know in real life. Shelby von Pelt even revealed in her acknowledgements that she based Tova, one of the main characters, on her own grandmother. She really melted my heart. All of the characters did, actually. Lullabye is the kind of charming small town that you cannot help but fall in love with. Its residents built such a friendly and caring community that I kind of wished I lived there myself. And the cherry on the top was Marcellus the octopus. I'm deeply moved by stories that involve animals, and the parts told from his point of view were some of my favorites. The only thing I would maybe criticize the book for is that there aren't more of them. They were sensitive, bright, and humorous. It was impossible not to think that animals are intelligent creatures too and have their own feelings. I will read to you one of the reflections that Marcellus made in regards to humans. Secrets are everywhere. Some humans are crammed full of them. How do they not explode? It seems to be a hallmark of the human species, abysmal communication skills. Not that any other species are much better, mind you, but even a herring can tell which way the school it belongs to is turning and follow accordingly. Why can humans not use their millions of words to simply tell one another what they desire? Pure wisdom. The last book I read so far is The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, and I'm completely speechless. I don't really know what I'm gonna read after this. It's definitely one of my favorite reads of this year and probably of all time. I loved Steinbeck's writing so much. It's extremely cinematic. He painted a whole world with his words, and you can see it right before your eyes. He did that with such ease, as if he never lifted his brush from the canvas. You get a taste of that from the very first lines. To the red country and part of the gray country of Oklahoma, the last rains came gently, and they did not cut the scarred earth. The plows crossed and recrossed the rivulet marks. The last rains lifted the corn quickly and scattered with colonies and grass along the sides of the roads, so that the gray country and the dark red country began to disappear under the green cover. The Grapes of Wrath is a book about survival. It's a historical fiction that follows closely the journey of a family who, similarly to thousands of others, had to move from Oklahoma to California during the Dust Bowl. Whenever the book mentioned going to California, the Led Zeppelin song played in my mind. Even if the context is totally different, Led Zeppelin is singing about going to this dreamlike place in the West where they hope to find love and fulfillment after suffering too much deception. And Steinbeck's book is pretty much about that hope. Having no place to live in and nothing to eat anymore, tens of thousands of people took Route 66 in search of work and a better future. Instead, they met hatred, exploitation, corruption, and abuse of power. Their dreams of living a decent life were crushed without any remorse. It's impossible to read this and not think of the USA of today, especially with this paragraph. Once California belonged to Mexico and its land to Mexicans, and a horde of tattered, feverish Americans poured in. And such was their hunger for land that they took the land, stole Sutter's land, Guerrero's land, took the grants and broke them up and growled and quarreled over them, those frantic, hungry men. And they guarded with guns the land they had stolen. They put up houses and barns. They turned the earth and planted crops. And these things were possessions, and possession was ownership. Too bad people forget their history. Finally, maybe one of my favorite quotes from the entire book is this: "If you who own the things people must have could understand this, you might preserve yourself. If you could separate causes from results, if you could know that Paine, Marx, Jefferson, Lenin were results, not causes, you might survive. But that you cannot know, for the quality of owning freezes you forever into I, and cuts you off forever from the we." Speechless. Okay, I think I'm ending on a high note with the last book. I will definitely turn this into a video essay. I'm going to read a romance book now.